Welcome back to Narrations, and wishing you all a very happy new year. As a new year begins, this month's stories are all about new beginnings, second chances, and finding hope when life doesn't go the way we planned. Tonight's movie is Begin Again, a quiet, heartfelt story about heartbreak, creativity, and starting over when everything you believed in falls apart. This isn't a movie about overnight success. It's about rebuilding, slowly, honestly, and on your own terms. The story begins in New York City, a place full of ambition, noise, and broken dreams quietly layered beneath bright lights and crowded streets. In a small apartment, Greta sits alone with her guitar. She has recently arrived from England, following the man she loved, believing in his talent, supporting his dream, and trusting that love would survive success. But the city has changed everything. Her boyfriend Dave has just released a hit album. He is now famous. And he has left her behind. Greta isn't dramatic about the breakup. She doesn't cry loudly or lash out. Instead, she feels unmoored, the kind of heartbreak that quietly empties your future plans without warning. She has no career in New York, no home of her own, and no clear idea of what comes next. She's staying with friends, avoiding questions, and holding on to her guitar like it's the last honest thing in her life. Music, for Greta, isn't about recognition. It's about survival. Across the city, another life is unraveling. Dan Mulligan was once a respected music executive, someone who discovered artists, trusted his instincts, and believed music mattered. Now, he's been fired from the label he helped build. Younger executives see him as outdated. His passion is dismissed as irrelevant. Dan drinks too much. He avoids going home. He barely speaks to his teenage daughter Violet, whose disappointment in him is louder than anger. His marriage is strained beyond repair, and his identity, once built around music, feels hollow. One night, almost by accident, their paths cross. Greta performs at a small, nearly empty bar. She's only on stage because her friend Steve encouraged her to play, hoping it might help her move forward. The audience barely pays attention. Greta sings anyway. The song is simple, unpolished, honest. As she plays, Dan listens, and something inside him wakes up. He doesn't just hear the melody, he imagines layers forming around it. Drums, harmonies, rhythm. Not to polish the song, but to reveal what's already there. In his mind, the music comes alive. When the song ends, the room responds politely. Nothing special. But Dan knows better. He approaches Greta awkwardly, stumbling over his words, trying to explain what he heard. Greta assumes he's another stranger offering empty praise and quickly shuts him down. Dan persists. He tells her she's extraordinary. She doesn't believe him. Eventually, curiosity wins, and they talk. Two strangers, both broken in different ways, recognize something familiar in each other. Dan proposes an idea, not a traditional record deal, not a studio album. He wants to record Greta's music live, out in the city. Parks. Rooftops. Subways. Streets. He wants New York itself to be part of the album. Greta hesitates. She has just been hurt by someone who promised her the world through music. She doesn't want to disappear into someone else's dream again. But Dan isn't promising fame. He's asking her to create. They begin recording together. As they move through the city, gathering musicians one by one, something subtle begins to change. Greta starts smiling again. Dan starts believing again. Music becomes their shared language, not as escape, but as a way back to themselves. Meanwhile, Dave's career continues to rise. Fame has changed him. He convinces himself that compromise is necessary, that love can wait, that music must be reshaped to fit expectations. He reaches out to Greta, wanting reassurance without accountability. This time, Greta doesn't bend. She is done shrinking herself to fit someone else's success. As the album takes shape, Dan confronts his own failures, as a husband, as a father, as a man who once loved music more than anything. Working with Greta forces him to listen again, to care again. Violet notices the shift. For the first time in years, she sees her father present, engaged, not hiding behind regret or alcohol. Their relationship begins to soften, not through apologies, but through shared moments. Greta, too, changes. She stops seeing herself as someone abandoned. She begins to see herself as someone choosing her own voice. But as the project nears completion, temptation returns. Dave offers Greta visibility, opportunity, and a chance to step back into the spotlight she once followed him into. Everything she once wanted is suddenly within reach again. Greta must decide. Does she return to the familiar pain of compromise? Or does she choose the uncertain peace of independence? And Dan faces his own question. Does he chase relevance again? Or does he finally let music be about connection instead of control? As the city hums around them, both stand on the edge of something new, not guaranteed, not glamorous, but honest. Because sometimes, a new beginning doesn't come with certainty. It comes with courage. As the city continues to move around them, the album Greta and Dan are creating begins to feel less like a project and more like a record of transformation. Each song is recorded in a different place: a rooftop at sunset, a park alive with passing footsteps, a street corner humming with life. There are no retakes meant to perfect mistakes. The imperfections are welcomed. A siren in the distance. A dog barking. A laugh between takes. The music feels alive because the people making it are finally present. Greta grows more confident with every recording. She no longer plays to be approved. She plays because the songs belong to her. They carry her story, heartbreak, resilience, honesty, and she refuses to soften them for anyone else. Dan, too, begins to change. For the first time in years, he wakes up with purpose. He drinks less. He listens more. He shows up. Working with Greta reminds him why he fell in love with music in the first place, not for power or recognition, but for connection. That change doesn't go unnoticed. Dan's daughter Violet watches carefully. She's spent years protecting herself from disappointment, learning not to expect anything from her father. But now, she sees him engaged again, laughing, collaborating, caring. Slowly, cautiously, she lets him back in. They start spending time together. Sharing headphones. Talking about music. Arguing less. Not because everything is fixed, but because something is finally being tried. Meanwhile, Dave's success continues to grow. The industry reshapes him. Producers polish his sound. Managers push him towards safer choices. The raw honesty that once defined his music is replaced with something marketable, something hollow. Dave reaches out to Greta again. This time, he doesn't just want forgiveness. He wants her voice back in his world. He offers her opportunity, exposure, stages, recognition. Everything she once followed him across the ocean for. The offer forces Greta to confront her past honestly. She remembers who she was when she arrived in New York, hopeful, devoted, willing to disappear inside someone else's dream. And she sees clearly who she is now. Someone who found her own voice. Greta declines Dave's offer. Not angrily. Not bitterly. Simply, firmly. She doesn't need to be part of someone else's success to feel whole anymore. As the album is completed, Dan faces his own reckoning. A label offers to buy the record, but with conditions. They want control. Changes. Polishing. Marketability. Everything that once drained the meaning out of music for him. Dan looks at Greta. He knows what she'll choose. He turns the deal down. Instead, they decide to release the album independently. No guarantees. No protection. Just honesty. It's a risk. But it's theirs. The album is released quietly. No massive promotion. No spotlight. And yet, it finds its audience. Not overnight. Not explosively. But steadily. People listen. People share. People feel seen. The music connects because it isn't trying to impress. It's trying to be true. Dan and Greta celebrate in their own way, not with applause or champagne, but with the quiet satisfaction of knowing they stayed honest. They didn't fix everything. They didn't win dramatically. They simply chose better. Dan repairs his relationship with his wife, not by pretending the past didn't happen, but by acknowledging his failures and showing up differently. Their future remains uncertain, but it's no longer frozen in resentment. Violet trusts him again, cautiously, but genuinely. Greta prepares to move on. Not to chase fame. Not to follow someone else. But to continue creating on her own terms. Before they part ways, Dan offers Greta a more personal connection, something that might grow into romance. Greta listens, then gently declines. She isn't rejecting him. She's choosing herself. For the first time, she doesn't need a relationship to define her direction. They part with gratitude, respect, and understanding, knowing that some people come into our lives not to stay forever, but to help us begin again. Greta walks through the city one last time with her guitar, no longer lost. Dan watches from a distance, content. Both have changed. Not because they succeeded, but because they were honest. Begin Again ends quietly, without grand resolution. It reminds us that new beginnings aren't loud. They don't always look like victory. Sometimes, they look like walking forward without fear. This is a story about choosing authenticity over approval. About rebuilding after heartbreak. And about understanding that starting over doesn't mean erasing the past, it means learning from it. If you're beginning a new year feeling uncertain, this story is a reminder that it's okay to start small. To start quietly. To start honestly. If you enjoy listening to stories about fresh starts, second chances, and finding your way back to yourself, you'll find many more narrations like this here. Thanks for listening. And here's to new beginnings.